Good evening, everyone. My name is Brother Lewis, and I've been making videos concerning corruption within leadership. If you go down to my username, click there, pull up our channel page, click on videos, scroll down to number 68. You'll see a couple of videos there that will actually explain what it is that this channel is all about. For those of you who have been here and you're already familiar, then welcome back. We hope that you've enjoyed and had a beautiful day this day. This video, I've been working on the contents of this video for several weeks now. Actually turns out to be a few months. I had told one of our viewers a while back that I would do this, and it actually, now that I think about it, there's been a few of our viewers that have brought this particular subject up. This video will be about the maids. Because it is such a sensitive topic, I want to take my time and present as much as I can for everyone to get a complete grasp of what it is that we're trying to present. At the same token, I don't want to forget about what's currently taking place within our organization. We're going through some tough times. As we gathered also to say goodbye to one of our dear friends and brothers, we should also remember that times like these show us where we need to be more careful. While we send love and prayers and support to those who are hurting, we also need to look out for anyone who might prey on our loved ones who are still hurting, especially those who are too young, too weak, or don't know how to protect themselves. Now, I did take a moment, not a moment, but quite a bit of time to jot down some notes. And I kind of arranged them so that, again, I won't end up rambling. As much of our information that we're putting out is not only deeply personal, but it is quite sensitive in nature. So that said, I want to make sure that I give due diligence to this particular subject, but also to the fact that we are coming to a point where we need to again consider our brothers and sisters who have felt and shared loss. We have some working members who are still involved with a place that we too used to work hard in, and that is the organization that I'm a part of, the United House of Prayer for All People. We have some of our family members and friends who are still working to do anything and everything that was asked of them, the same way we used to do anything and everything that was asked of us by individuals that were put before us. There are some now who look back after removing themselves to be able to take a step back and take a serious look at what we've been doing all this time. We finally realized that some of those individuals in front of us who claimed to love and care for us were actually taking advantage of us the entire time. Even now, people can pretend to care while secretly doing harm, especially those in leadership who say that they're here to protect us, but sometimes continue to seek ways to rob from us instead. They rob our time, they rob our attention, they rob our strength, They take any and everything that they can, those things that we're willing to give. It's okay and important to grieve right now, but we also have to stay watchful for those of us who are not within that tight-knit bonds of family as well as close friends. We have to stay watchful and speak out so that others will not end up being neglected, abused, and mistreated, and that these things no longer take place to tear our communities apart. Slowly but surely, eyes are being opened so that we no longer allow greed and manipulation to silently work in our midst to drive the rest of our loved ones to an early grave. We've seen plenty of our members, our family members, our friends, members of the organization do and run and concern themselves with keeping up with expectations to the extent that they simply gave it their all until they could give no more, including their very lives. Like the past, we are no longer in a position where we don't have a choice. No, today we get to choose whether we're going to save ourselves from further self-induced harm or if we're going to continue putting ourselves in harm's way. The Bible makes it clear that the men who ruled nations of people in the Old Testament were referred to as kings. We read in the scripture that the people of Israel one day asked the prophet Samuel to appoint a king, a human king, that we also, they said, may be like all the other nations. Samuel warned them, saying that this king would claim rights that would burden and exploit the people rather than truly care about the people's welfare. Among his warnings, the king would take sons and daughters for his own personal service. He would take the best of their fields, their vineyards, and olive groves, and actually give those things away to his own personal favored officials. This can be found in 1 Samuel 8, 11 through 14. The king would take from the people and also demand 1/10 of their grain, their flocks, their young men, even turning their own servants and property into tools of his own authority. The problem with this is that they were already brought out of slavery when they were in Egypt, and to ask now for a king would, in fact, essentially put them back in that same kind of servitude to another man. Moses, earlier in Deuteronomy 17, 14 through 20, also warned that if Israel chose a king, that person must obey God's laws and not turn away to the right or to the left, and not lift himself above the people, and must not use their position selfishly. This rule for kings was given to Moses because a king's power, unchecked, most often leads to misuse in all areas of that king's kingdom. Solomon knew full well how much control a king might be able to wield over the people who are under him. Ecclesiastes 8:4 says, "Where the word of a king is, there is power. And who may say unto him, What doest thou?" The authority of that king is complete, 100%, including the lives of the people being in their hands. Because of this, people often endured injustice committed to them in silence, while being afraid to ask questions or challenge authority, even when authority behaved itself unjustly. In Samuel's message, the people will cry out because of the burdens placed on them by the king they asked for. Yet, when that day comes, the very one they asked to give them a king said that he will not hear them because they did not heed the warning he had already given them by Samuel in advance. Just like their people might not have been valued by rulers in that time, we too experience being devalued when a family member in our organization departs after years and years of dedicated, devoted service to men who are also in positions of authority. Oftentimes, there's not much public acknowledgement made or very little attention given from the leader at all to the family. No pause from their scheduled agendas, and no real mourning from them to honor the years of service that they had been given by the dearly departed. This is not because one of their subjects' deaths goes unnoticed, but rather because the priorities of the leaders is not to be involved with trivial matters, such as caring about the fall of one of their workers. As long as they have others to replace them, then everyone must carry on after the ceremonies are over and get right back to the business of making their tally of bricks or raising and collecting their money in the form of taxes, if we were back in the Old Testament of the Bible. In these more modern times, believe it or not, you wouldn't have to be a king or a queen to have someone else to rule over. There is one practice that lasted even since the early days of the scripture up until now, and that is the practice of owning people as property. The ones who owned them might even be referred to as a lord or master, and if you're female, you would be called a mistress. People of all ethnic groups, races, and nationalities at one time served as a servant under slavery to someone else. Sometimes slaves were also of the same race or nationality as their owner. When we speak of American slavery, we often recall brutal labor, the punishment with whips, the chains used to keep them bound together. But too often, we overlook the silent suffering of the people that were the most vulnerable, little boys and little girls. These children were forced into people's lives that denied them not only freedom, but the very essence of their childhood. Torn from their families, often raised by strangers who treated them as property, these children were thrust into adult responsibilities before they had even learned how to read or how to write. They endured cruel and harsh treatment, but the worst kind was toward the girls. They became domestic workers, tasked with cleaning homes, cooking meals, and even caring for the children of those who enslaved them, all while being denied care, love, and protection for themselves, not to mention dreaming of having a family of their own one day to love and to provide for. Many of these girls were used as personal attendants, assigned to follow their adult masters, male or female, or their master's children throughout the day while waiting for their every command. They were expected to dress others before they could even dress themselves. If they made a mistake, they were punished harshly, physically or emotionally, sometimes verbally, without mercy or regard for their age. In the fields, some were forced to carry water buckets larger than their small bodies or pick cotton under a blistering sun. Their value was measured not by their humanity, but by how well they could serve the needs of those who saw them as objects. There was no safe space for them, no rest, no play, no freedom. Worst of all, These little children lived without the basic comfort of belonging. They were born into abandonment, ripped from their mothers before being sold away, raised without tenderness, and often isolated from any consistent care. The emotional wounds were deep. They grew up not knowing love, only duty, not knowing safety, only obedience. Their dreams, if they had any, were stifled by the constant weight of fear and survival. Slavery didn't just chain their hands, but it stole their voices, their innocence, and their sense of self. And as we reflect on those times today, we must do so, not only to remember their pain, but to honor their endurance, and to ensure we never again look away from the suffering of the most defenseless among us, boys and girls taken advantage of by adults who took no mercy on them at all. Today, in our organization, we're dealing with a hard truth, whether we like it or not. The truth is that our children, for more than 100 years, are being born into systems of dominion where they are expected to serve. Not because of love for what they do or by their own choices, but because they're required to do so from an early age by men who resemble what might look to some as a type of king in our day, the bishops of the United House of Prayer for All People. Babies born into this organization grow up under tedious and immense pressures placed on them out of a sense of duty passed on by their parents or other adults, even with their parents sometimes not knowing, directing the child to please the one-man leadership in charge while serving whatever group that they may be a part of. People around them supervise these children in specific areas of service for the organization, but the worst positions of service here also goes to the little girls. Selected women are placed in authority over them at a young age, sometimes as young as 5 years old, to begin training them to meet demands, offer loyalty, and give their submission to whatever man happens to be the leader, often without adequate care, rest, or freedom. What looks like fun for an honorable position in the eyes of a little girl soon has the potential of becoming a nightmare to a specially chosen few without their knowledge of what's waiting for them down the road as they begin to grow up. Their existence is set for one specific purpose: to be prepared, trained, and used by one person and one person only, the man who would be king. When we look at what has been happening in our organization recently, young girls asked to serve adult men in roles that demand long hours, silence, obedience, and even travel away from home, we see a disturbing echo of those same scriptural warnings. These practices, in effect, right now, treat the innocent much like how a king in Samuel's warning would treat his citizens in Israel's day, using children, taking from them, giving little concern for their welfare, and hiding abuses. This allowance given to men as a spiritual leader to this nationwide organization takes on an entirely different persona whenever these little girls must also refer to them publicly or in private behind closed doors as daddy. When we compare these things to the suffering of little girls during slavery, forced to serve, punished for mistakes, and robbed of their childhoods, we must admit it begins to mirror exactly what's been happening with our girls today. In some places, when they're not within public view, there are young girls who are still being treated in ways that deny them the freedom, dignity, teachings, and care that they deserve. They may not be legally enslaved, but their lives are tightly controlled, and their roles often benefit adults around them at the expense of their own well-being. These girls are made to wear all around the organization strict uniforms that resemble maid outfits from the times of the past. And just like those little girls way back then, these girls today are expected to be quiet, obedient, and always ready to serve. During services or events, they may be forced to stand in the aisles or on what we call the mountain for long periods of time, at times even hours, just to fan these grown men, even when centralized air conditioning has already cooled the room and is constantly readily available. These actions send a clear message that their role is to serve, not to grow, and certainly not to question. The organization has the words "all people" in its name. Yet in practice, it appears that participation is largely limited to one racial or ethnic group. This raises important questions. How would this look if little girls from other backgrounds witnessed young girls fanning a religious leader or spending nights in private at various church-owned properties around the country? How would it look if little girls of other ethnicities, of other nationalities, of other races were standing and fanning these grown men? When we think about this, it allows us to take a moment to consider exactly how our girls look. How might parents from other communities respond if their children were expected to carry out the same duties currently assigned to ours, serving adult men in ways that may seem unusual or inappropriate outside our tradition? These are serious considerations that deserve open and honest reflection. As if they were serving a king or an owner, these girls are also taught not to speak up or to ask any questions. Their lives revolve around obedience and service, not their own dreams, not their own choices. The setting might appear cleaner or more organized than in the past, but the mental or psychological damage being done to these girls is still just as real. When young girls are used to support powerful adults, instead of being supported by their own loving families themselves, we are repeating a painful history of the past. Today, even though they're free in many ways, they still live under strict control and with little ability to make their own choices. The law says they have protection, but if they're isolated, if they're scared, if they feel manipulated, that protection is not real in their minds. It's just a thing written down in books somewhere. Travel is another area where the past and present seem to overlap. In slavery, girls were moved by their owners without warning or permission. Today, reports have been made that certain hand-picked girls are taken across state lines, often without full explanation or consent, to help religious leaders when on the road, for special events, or behind-the-scenes tasks. They may miss school, time with family, and important events that enable them to develop as they grow up. Even if it looks more organized than in the past, the impact on their childhood can be just as harmful, if not worse. Perhaps most concerning is not being able to make their own choices and decisions. Enslaved girls had none. And today, these girls still live under this intense control. They're expected to stay silent, obey every order, and never question authority around them. Even though their situation isn't legally slavery, the outcome can feel for them just the same. These children used for the benefit of others, with little say, if any, in their own lives, and little chance to be protected from harm, are consistently in a state of mixed emotions, fear, loneliness, and a host of other disheartening issues. Because childhood is not just a phase, it's the foundation for everything that follows. It should be full of learning, play, wonder, and emotional safety. Childhood is where girls are supposed to ask questions, explore their talents, make mistakes, and grow into strong, confident young ladies. But when that time is taken, when a girl is made to carry adult burdens too early, it changes her. She may learn fear instead of curiosity, exhaustion instead of hope, silence instead of self-expression. That is why this issue matters, because simply being a child was the very first thing being taken from her. And every child deserves a chance to actually be a child. Have you ever thought about what they must be feeling while serving? Imagine how one of these little girls, let's say 9 years old, is standing at the front of a large congregation during service. Her back hurts, her knees ache, and she's too afraid to move. She watches others, adults and children, sitting comfortably while she continues to stand. She keeps fanning and fanning. Arm feels as if it's about to fall off. Or she may continue passing money up and down steps, walking up and down aisles without saying a word. She might be tired, confused, even a little scared. Thoughts might pass through her mind. What if I do something wrong? Or why can't I rest like everyone else? But she keeps those questions inside because she's been taught that obedience is holiness, that silence is strength. What about those times alone with the ones that they are meant to serve? How does she feel then? Who is there for her during those times? How is she supposed to respond? And who can she tell if things go in a direction that things should never go with them? She may eventually believe that her value is tied to how well she performs. In that moment, she's not just a child anymore. She's carrying the emotional weight of someone else's image and expectations. And although her face may be that of a little girl, inside, she may feel invisible, exhausted, and unsure of who she is anymore, uncertain of who she's even allowed to be. This is not spiritual growth. This is emotional pressure. And no child should have to carry that burden. Let me describe the long-term psychological effects that might impact these girls in the long run. There is a loss of identity. When a girl grows up being told that her main purpose is to serve others, especially adults in positions of power. She may never have the chance to truly discover who she really is. Instead of being encouraged to explore her own interests, her focus becomes what others expect from her. As she becomes an adult, she may struggle with questions like, what is it that I want? Or what makes me happy? She may struggle with these questions because she was never given the space to actually ask them. Her self-image becomes shaped not by her uniqueness, but by how well she pleases or assists others. She may feel a feeling of low self-worth when praise, affection, or attention is tied only to how well a girl performs a task. It can damage her sense of value. Over time, she may believe that she only matters when she's doing something to please someone else. Rest may feel like laziness. Speaking up may feel like rebellion. Setting boundaries may feel like failure. This constant pressure can follow her into adulthood, causing her to doubt her own self-worth unless she's actively helping or serving someone else, even to the point of neglecting her own needs. She may feel chronic anxiety, being raised in environments with rigid expectations and constant monitoring, often learning to live in a state of quiet fear. She may worry about making a mistake or disappointing a leader or being seen as disrespectful. This ongoing tension doesn't simply fade as they grow up, it can develop into long-term anxiety. As adults, they might struggle with racing thoughts, insomnia, panic attacks, or difficulty speaking up in everyday situations, living in performance mode, or for years living in performance mode for years teaches their nervous system that it's never safe to fully relax. What about depression and emotional numbness? When girls are expected to smile through exhaustion, stay silent even when they're hurting, and suppress their true emotions, they often become emotionally disconnected. Over time, many say that they don't know how to feel anymore. Joy, sadness, anger, everything becomes muted. Some describe feeling empty or hollow without understanding why. This emotional shutdown is a survival response, but it often leads to long-term depression, difficulty forming deep emotional connections, and an overall sense of being detached from their own life. Many will have difficulty trusting others. Trust is built when caregivers actually protect, listen to, and honor a child's needs. But if a girl grows up being used in this manner, she may come to see relationships as unsafe or one-sided. As an adult, she might keep people at a distance or feel that every interaction comes with a hidden demand. She may even fear kindness, wondering when it will turn into another expectation. This makes it hard to build friendships, partnerships, or even more meaningful support systems. How can she possibly prepare for even a marriage? Her own internalized anger begins to turn inward. In many of these environments, girls are not allowed to express anger. Speaking up may be seen as disobedient, and showing frustration may be treated as a weakness or sin. So instead of learning how to process their anger in healthy ways, many girls turn that emotion inward. They blame themselves for what they went through. They feel guilt for having questions or doubts. Some may struggle with self-harming behaviors or deep shame that they carry for years, simply because they were never given permission to feel what they felt. Many of them will deal with parenting challenges and struggles. A girl who grows up without a nurturing, protective childhood may face deep challenges if and when she becomes a parent herself. She may not know how to comfort a crying child, how to set healthy boundaries, or how to encourage independence, because no one ever did those things for her. Many survivors describe feeling unprepared, confused, or overwhelmed by parenting. It's not because they don't care. It's simply because they were never given the example or the support they needed to learn what true care looks like. What this really means for the girls is a stolen foundation. Years of their lives spent serving others instead of discovering themselves. When children are placed in long-term roles meant for adults, under the banner of obedience or faith, their sense of worth becomes rooted in performance, not in love, not in belonging. They learn to ignore their own needs, silence their own voices, and shrink themselves to meet the expectations of others. This is not harmless tradition. It's emotional harm masked as spiritual service. And when these children begin to believe that overwork, silence, and exhaustion are signs of godliness, we must stop and ask, is this truly our Father's will? Scripture reminds us in Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way they should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. But if we train them to carry burdens instead of dreams, to follow blindly instead of growing boldly, what path are we really preparing them for? Our Heavenly Father never intended for his children to be used as tools to support adult pride or power. In Matthew 18:6, we're given a clear warning. But whoso shall offend one of these little ones, which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck, and that he were drowned in the depth of the sea. These are not light words. They show us how seriously we are to review the mistreatment of our children. When religious or organizational systems harm children in his name, we are not just breaking trust, we are violating sacred responsibilities. This is why reform is not optional, it's urgent. These so-called fathers to the people and their children in many ways act to take from the people rather than nurture or take care of the people. This behavior dishonors the model of what a man who truly represents the Father in heaven is supposed to look like. Our Heavenly Father, he gives love, protection, and provides even when we don't give him anything. And yet he, because of his love, is always giving. This act alone shows us that he truly loves his children and has their best interest at heart. But in contrast, when someone in spiritual leadership takes and takes and takes from those they say they love, when they use, abuse, and misuse their trust, their service, their very lives, build up an image or reputation, they begin to resemble the oppressive kings that Samuel warned the people of Israel about. There are some real serious consequences associated with this also that can and will lead to people having to talk to the authorities about the expectations of the children of the house of prayer. The Fair Labor Standards Act, enforced by the U.S. Department of Labor, provides a federal baseline for protecting minors from labor exploitation. Children under 14 are prohibited from working, with only a few exceptions, such as limited work in family-run businesses or specific agricultural tasks, such as living on a farm. For those aged 14 through 15, work hours and job types are strictly regulated to avoid interference with schooling or involvement in physically demanding tasks. Importantly, even unpaid labor can still be illegal if the child is performing structured duties that resemble employment, especially when the work is for the benefit of an organization or adult leadership. Many states take these protections even further, with laws that limit how long minors can stand on their feet, require regular rest breaks, and prioritize school attendance. If children are being made to work extended hours in ceremonial roles, travel regularly, or perform tasks without compensation or a choice, these actions could be in violation of both federal and state child labor laws. Every U.S. state enforces mandatory education laws requiring children of school age to attend school regularly. If a child's involvement in organizational travel or ceremonial labor causes them to miss school or fall behind academically, this may be evidence to support the fact that constitutes educational neglect. In such cases, parents can be held legally responsible, especially if they knowingly allowed their children to miss school for non-educational purposes. Most states also have truancy laws where repeated or unexcused absences can lead to formal investigations by school authorities or child protective services. If it's found that a child is consistently missing school in order to serve adult leaders or participate in religious ceremonies, the state may take legal action to hold caregivers accountable and ensure the child's right to an education is restored. Prolonged standing, silence, emotional pressure, or denial of food, rest, and basic care can meet the legal threshold for child neglect or emotional abuse, especially when children are required to perform under stressful or fearful conditions. In many states, the law recognizes that non-physical forms of abuse, such as using children to uphold the public image of adults, demanding silence under fear of punishment, or isolating them from supportive environments, can cause deep psychological harm. Forcing a child to serve adults without autonomy or the ability to say no may also constitute unlawful coercion, especially if the child is not truly free to leave the environment or decline participation. These conditions may justify intervention from child protective services and in some cases lead to criminal charges against responsible adults or the organizations they lead. The Trafficking Victims Protection Act, a federal law, expands the legal definition of human trafficking beyond physical captivity. It includes the use of minors for labor or services through force, fraud, or coercion. If children are being transported across state lines to perform unpaid or controlled labor, especially if they're not free to refuse participation, these actions may meet the legal criteria for child labor trafficking. The law does not require the presence of physical force. Psychological manipulation, spiritual pressure, or parental coercion can also be considered trafficking if the child is exploited for the benefit of others. Federal authorities, including the FBI and the Department of Justice, may get involved if the situation meets these legal standards. Mandatory reporting laws and organizational responsibilities are involved in all 50 states. Certain adults are legally required to report suspected child abuse or exploitation. This includes teachers, school staff, clergy members, counselors, and many nonprofit workers. If someone working within an organization sees a child being overworked, emotionally harmed, or removed from school, and fails to report it to the proper authorities, they may be violating mandatory reporting laws. Failure to report is not a minor issue. It can result in misdemeanor or felony charges depending on the state. Organizations that serve children must ensure their staff are trained in recognizing signs of abuse and are supported in reporting it without fear of retaliation. Organizations that claim tax exempt status under Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code, these organizations are required to operate exclusively for charitable, educational, or religious purposes. If they use children to collect money, perform labor, or uphold the public image of adult leaders, and especially if these practices result in undue benefit to specific individuals, the organization may be in violation of IRS regulations. This could trigger audits, the loss of nonprofit status, and even civil or criminal investigations. Nonprofits are also expected to follow all state and federal labor laws. Exploiting children under the protection of religious or charitable exemption is not only unethical, it may also end up being tried and punished as illegal. Parents or guardians can also be held civilly or criminally liable if it is proven they knew about illegal or exploitive practices involving their children and did nothing to stop it. Under many state laws, failure to protect a child from known harm can result in charges of contributing to the delinquency of a minor, child endangerment, or neglect. Additionally, if a child experiences long-term emotional or psychological harm, families, including their parents, may be named in civil lawsuits by other survivors or co-parents. In severe cases, parental rights could be challenged or reviewed by family courts, especially if a child's safety or development is at risk. Together, these legal frameworks exist to ensure that every child in the United States is protected from labor exploitation, coercion, and emotional harm, regardless of the setting. Whether it's in a corporation, a religious institution such as a church, a nonprofit, or a family, no one is above the law when it comes to the safety and the dignity of a child. If these protections are ignored, the consequences, both legal and moral, can be devastating. The path forward begins with awareness, followed by firm action to remove children from harm and hold those responsible accountable. Reform is not just necessary, it is actually required by law, by ethics, and by basic human compassion. What that means is what we have gotten away with all this time needs to be seriously evaluated and considered and brought to a halt, especially since we have individuals who have reported all kinds of abuse taking place to them, with them, around them, as well as among others. Silence in young girls serving in these roles does not mean absence of harm. What suppression of internal fears or stresses often looks like, and how the unseen suffering takes hold. First, quietness, being quiet, is not the same as the child being at peace. A young girl who stands motionless, saying nothing, or smiles even when exhausted, may be practicing her own survival technique. She has learned early that questions are dangerous, that weakness must stay hidden. Over time, this kind of suppression becomes reflexive. She guards her thoughts, hides her pain, and avoids any sign of struggle. On the outside, she may appear composed. Inside, may say she's well-behaved or strong. The people around her, observing her, this may be their impression. But inwardly, her nervous system is on alert, waiting for judgment, criticism, or disappointment. This constant internal monitoring wears down resilience, self-awareness, and the ability even to recognize her own distress. Second, the suppression of internal fears and stresses reshapes emotional life. Because she's been told that emotions like anger, sadness, or fatigue are signs of failure or disobedience, she begins to mistrust her own inner self. She may feel guilty simply for being tired, ashamed for wanting rest, fearful of speaking up whenever she's hurt. These internalized messages build up over the years. Without acknowledgement or safe outlets, they often turn into chronic anxiety, restless nights, constant worry, body aches, and a pervasive sense that she is never enough. The mind becomes conditioned to anticipate threat of disapproval, spiritual rebuke, or social isolation. Every decision, every movement is filtered through thoughts that says, will this bring me trouble? Rather than saying, what do I need? Third, silence often hides isolation. A girl may be separated physically from peers or family or friends. Even if present, she may avoid close connection, believing that closer relationships invite scrutiny or danger. She might not share her true thoughts or feelings for fear of disappointing those in authority. Under this pressure, emotional loneliness becomes normal. And yet, even though isolated, she may constantly watch others, observing how they move, how they speak, how they react, in order to protect herself, to avoid drawing negative attention. The cost is steep. Lack of authentic connection undermines trust, belonging, and emotional safety, which are all critical for her own healthy development into a young, thriving woman. Fourth, internal suppression often shows up in physical ways. Stress that is refused expression does not vanish. That stress eventually shows up in the body. Headaches, stomach aches, tight chest, or restless sleep are common. She might have trouble concentrating, lose interest in things she once enjoyed, or become overly fatigued. She might be fine in public, but exhausted when she's alone. She might wake up with anxiety or find herself startled by small things, or she may even suffer nightmares. Over time, these physical symptoms can become chronic health issues. The body carries what the mind can't say. Fifth, the internal suppression of fears and stresses affects self-perception and thought patterns. She may come to believe that she is unworthy unless she serves. That rest is selfish. That asking for help is shameful. Doubt, guilt, fear become constant companions. When mistakes happen, she blames herself deeply. When she feels even slightly different from expectations, she internalizes criticism rather than recognizing it as unfair. Over time, these thought patterns solidify into negative core beliefs. I am not only worthy, I am only worthwhile if I obey. I should keep my head down. I am not good in my own right. These thoughts ought not be. 6, the effects ripple into adulthood and relationships, mental health, and identity. Even when removed from the environment, she may find it hard to trust others, hard to set boundaries, able only to perform kindness or service rather than engage authentically. Anxiety, depression, and emotional numbness become frequent visitors. She may try to solve everything for others, but neglect her own needs or avoid conflict entirely. She may struggle with finding her voice or choosing work, relationships, or a life that aligns with her own true self because she was never encouraged or allowed to explore those options when she was young. Seventh, perhaps the most painful thing, many of these girls come to believe that this is normal, that silence, sacrifice, and service are what children do, what faith asks of them, what love looks like. When they finally realize they were harmed, shame and confusion often follow as she begins to think, if others saw this as right, maybe I did deserve it. That realization may come late, and it can be destabilizing, but it is also powerful because awareness can lead to change. Yet without support, safe space, counseling, validation, many suffer in isolation, never knowing that what they endured was abuse, and never being sure how to rebuild their own sense of self or freedom. Let's never forget, childhood is not a job. It's not a resource to be used or a role to be assigned for the benefit of powerful adults. Under both federal and state law, children are entitled to protection from labor conditions that exploit their time, health, or their development. The Fair Labor Standards Act is the primary federal law that sets limits on child labor. It restricts the type of work minors can perform, the number of hours they may work, and the age at which they may begin working. Generally, children under 14 are not allowed to work at all, except in very specific situations, as we mentioned earlier. Importantly, even unpaid labor will violate these laws if the nature of the work resembles employment or benefits an organization financially, especially when minors are assigned to roles that resemble domestic service, fundraising, or ceremonial tasks under adult supervision. Additionally, state labor laws often go further, with tighter restrictions on hours worked, mandatory breaks, and educational requirements. Parents, guardians, and organizational leaders need to be certain to familiarize themselves with these laws so that they do not raise serious red flags under both labor and trafficking statutes. When children are routinely put on the road to travel and serve in religious or organizational standards, it may violate mandatory laws enforced by every U.S. state. In most serious cases, particularly when minors are transported across state lines to serve in unpaid or high-demand roles, these laws can and oftentimes do come into place. When children are subjected to labor-like treatment, exploitation, or emotional harm within a religion or nonprofit setting, they may be in violation of all, if not most, of these laws. There are also serious legal implications under nonprofit law when children are used in ways that may benefit adult leaders or the organization's finances. Many of the girls placed in these roles suffer quietly because they're taught that speaking up, quite frankly, is dangerous. This fear creates an emotional prison that many children don't know how to escape. Outwardly, they smile, they follow instructions, that they perform their duties without protest. But internally, they may be overwhelmed by confusion, anxiety, and loneliness because their emotional needs are often dismissed or labeled as distractions from their purpose. They may begin to believe that their feelings don't matter at all. As a result, many of these girls never speak about what they're going through, sometimes not until years later, if ever. Their silence should never be mistaken for consent. It is often the result of pressure, fear, and conditioning that teaches them they must endure this kind of suffering all by themselves, alone. Verbal and mental abuse of children, even when framed in religious or spiritual language, can raise serious legal concerns. When children are regularly belittled, humiliated, or made to feel worthless through manipulative or controlling speech, it may be classified as emotional abuse under both state and federal child protection laws. Physical mistreatment, even when not causing visible injury, may also constitute abuse under child welfare and protection laws. Forcing these children to remain standing or kneeling for extended periods without rest, food, or water, or bathroom access can and will be classified also as neglect or unlawful physical discipline. If physical contact, such as forcefully grabbing, hitting, or pushing, is used as correction or punishment, it may also meet the legal definition of physical abuse, particularly when done without parental consent or in a setting where the child cannot freely leave. These actions, when paired with verbal control, send a harmful message that the child's physical and emotional boundaries do not matter. In many states, both emotional and physical abuse are mandated reporting offenses, meaning that any adult who becomes aware of such treatment is legally required to report it to authorities. Failing to do so may lead to civil and criminal consequences for individuals or the organization involved. Many of these girls placed in these roles experience this sort of deep emotional exhaustion. Since we know reports are accurate, the children within the United House of Prayer are routinely serving in roles that resemble full-time domestic labor, such as actively keeping and being responsible for adult duties, including bearing the obligations of domestic maids, performing cleaning duties, and providing ceremonial or personal services to adult leaders throughout the week and more often on weekends. This places the organization in a legally and ethically vulnerable position. Under federal and state child labor laws, the consistent use of minors in such capacities, especially if unpaid, and if the duties interfere with education, require extensive hours, or resemble formal employment, could potentially constitute unlawful child labor. Even if it's labeled as volunteering or religious service, the line is crossed when the responsibilities mimic those of a job and primarily benefit adults or the institution. Now, we must address a serious and heartbreaking issue that has emerged from the testimonies of former participants regarding exploitation that unfortunately resulted in pregnancy. Over time, several women, formerly maids as little girls, now adults, have bravely come forward to recount experiences of being exploited by adult men and at times women too, in positions of authority while they were still minors. These troubling incidents often occurred under the misleading pretense of spiritual mentorship, leadership training, or so-called private assignments. The disturbing accounts reveal a pattern of emotional grooming through excessive praise and attention, as well as isolation in private settings where these male leaders or female overseers exerted their influence. Victims were frequently instructed to remain silent, and many felt that disclosing the abuse would bring shame upon themselves or their families or their communities. Tragically, some of these encounters led to pregnancy, which was sometimes concealed or dealt with in secretive ways, leaving the young women to bear the brunt of the consequences, often shamed, often blamed, or sent away without support. Regardless of the circumstances, the emotional repercussions are severe and long-lasting. These young girls were not afforded the protection they rightfully deserved. They were, in fact, exploited, and far too many of them carried this unacknowledged trauma into adulthood, lacking justice and the care that they so desperately needed. Let me be absolutely clear. No spiritual or organizational objective can ever justify such misuse or abuse of a child. Pregnancy resulting from this type of behavior is not merely a misstep. It is and has always been a crime that must be acknowledged and addressed under the law. When examining the human impact of these experiences, it becomes clear that the emotional toll on the girls involved is profound and deeply damaging. Many may feel trapped in silence, exhausted but expected to smile, fearful yet unable to reach out for help. When a child is harmed and then told it is her fault or that her suffering serves a higher purpose, it creates confusion and self-blame that can last well into her adulthood. Some may even face unthinkable circumstances, such as pregnancies mentioned already. Other situations like being without protection and having no compassion or support from those around them. Over time, these experiences can lead to feelings of powerlessness, shame, invisibility, and intense fear. The most devastating outcome is when a young person begins to believe that such mistreatment is normal or deserved, accepting it as an unchangeable part of their lives. This distorted sense of worth and normalcy can affect a survivor's ability to trust, to form healthy relationships, or to heal emotionally, further stressing the importance of why protection, accountability, and compassionate intervention are absolutely necessary. The importance of speaking the truth in situations like these cannot be overstated. This conversation is not about placing blame. It is, however, about protecting these vulnerable children and bringing hidden, covered up, undealt with harms to many children of the past to light. We now know that some of these girls who are still very young and barely into their teens became pregnant during their time of service. Rather than being protected or given access to proper care and support, several of these little girls were placed into arranged marriages shortly afterward, reportedly to conceal this situation and maintain the image of the leader or the organization. This practice not only denies children their right to safety and a voice, but it also compounds their trauma under the weight of secrecy and silence. Every child deserves more than a life shaped by fear, coercion, or control. They deserve safety, dignity, and the freedom to experience a real childhood. When systems fail to provide that kind of safety, and worse, whenever they enable those in power to do harm to these little girls, and in a few cases, boys, those who can speak out have a responsibility to do so. If no one else will say it, then we must. Truth-telling is not an attack. It is an act of protection. And when it comes to the well-being of our children, our neighbors' children, our community's children, silence should never, ever be an option. When some of these girls left in a difficult and impossible situation, found themselves unexpectedly pregnant, especially under these challenging conditions, the focus quickly shifted away from her health and well-being to handling the situation quietly in order to protect the perpetrators who did this to them. Reports from former members and survivors show a troubling pattern where the safety and the mental health of these young girls was completely and totally ignored. Instead, the main goal became damage control, creating a culture of silence. Outside authorities were kept in the dark, and families often felt great pressure to hide the facts, as those who were aware worked diligently framing the consequences to the families in terms of spiritual or social shame. Unfortunately, the girls often bore the blame. They were made to feel responsible for their situation, regardless of her previous circumstances, being forced into this situation, or regardless of her actions, having to be quiet and no one to go to. As a result of successful cover-ups, forced or arranged marriages became a common way to hide the truth. Leaders would usually set up a marriage with the person responsible for the pregnancy if it wasn't them, or with some other member chosen in order to take the responsibility in cases that it was them. These marriages were not based on love or choice, but instead a way to cover up the child's abuse altogether. Sadly, the girls, often still teens, found themselves entering legal or ceremonial commitments that prioritized the group's reputation over their own well-being. In some cases, they were forced to have the babies aborted. With little to no say in these life-changing decisions, their futures were controlled by adults in power. The pregnancy was often downplayed with terms like a mistake or a lesson, while the child they carried represented a truth that was quite simply painfully ignored. That there was something very, very dark taking place behind closed doors, being masked by people pretending to be doing a work to help save souls. Over time, the hidden consequences of covering up pregnancies and arranging secret relationships have started to show, especially among younger people who grew up in these settings. Because the truth about who a child's parents are was often kept quiet. Many people in the congregations may be related without even knowing it. Some half-siblings were raised around each other without realizing they actually share a parent. Others who were born from arranged marriages don't know the real story behind how they themselves came into the world. This kind of secrecy isn't just a private or family issue. It can cause serious problems for health, legal matters, and emotional well-being. Not knowing your true family history can lead to medical risks, confusion about inheritance, and can even lead to relationships between people who are unknowingly related. It also shows how the needs of children were sometimes ignored by people all around leadership in order to protect the United House of Prayer or the leaders themselves. Keeping the truth hidden may have seemed like a way to avoid shame, but in reality, it created long-term harm that still affects many lives around the organization today. Let us be absolutely clear on this point. This practice must stop completely, immediately, and without exception. No child should ever be placed in a marriage as a means to cover up abuse. This compounds the abuse into even more abuse. And no pregnancy resulting from an adult's misconduct should be hidden to protect an organization's image or the perpetrator, the adult who did those deeds in the first place. When a minor becomes pregnant under questionable or unlawful circumstances, the responsibility lies with the adults involved, not with the child. Forcing a girl to bear the weight of secrecy, shame, or forced commitment not only causes deep emotional harm, it also violates serious legal protections. Such actions fall under violations of child welfare laws, mandatory reporting requirements, and in many jurisdictions, statutes concerning coercion, human trafficking, as well as statutory rape. Arranged unions involving minors in this context are also breaking state laws on illegal marriage of children. These are not isolated moral failures. They are potential criminal offenses with long-term consequences. No religious nonprofit or community institution is above the law when it comes to protecting these children. The priority must always be the safe dignity and well-being of the child, not the reputation of the adults or organizations who knew and worked hard to cover up the matter while ignoring the needs of the new or expectant mother, who is yet, according to our laws, still a child herself. Many of these children suffered over the years into their young adulthood, into their current state. Many of them having nowhere to turn to, many of them not knowing where to go and what to do, many of them suffering even more abuse from their forced to marry husbands, many of them divorced and turned to different chemical dependencies. Many of them turned to a life that they never thought they would in order to try to run away from such horrors. Many of them today are still carrying these burdens and these memories from traumatic experiences and still suffering under depression, anxiety, internal fears, a lack of trust, engaging in things and situations that they thought would allow them to erase the pain, but only brought more. Let's not forget the great possibility of charges that need to be examined concerning the various and the many women who used to be girls who were involved against their will in statutory rapes. Statutory rape is a legal term that refers to sexual activity between an adult and a minor who is legally unable to give consent due to their age, even if the minor agrees to or initiates the act. In the United States, each state sets its own age of consent laws, which typically range from 16 to 18 years old. If an adult engages in this type of conduct with someone below that age, regardless of whether force or coercion is involved, it may be considered statutory because the law presumes that the minor is not legally capable of consenting. Consent is not ever a defense in most of these cases. Some states have a close in age exemption, sometimes called a Romeo and Juliet law. However, these are not the issues involved in these cases when we're speaking about our children performing such tasks with leaders of this organization. Penalties can range from fines and probation to significant prison time and mandatory ex-offender registration, depending on the state and the age difference involved. Statutory laws are designed to protect minors from exploitation and abuse, even in situations where the relationship may appear consensual. The time for reform is now. Reform begins with the truth, plain, transparent, and uncompromised. If we're serious about protecting children and pursuing justice, we must first acknowledge the full scope of the harm being done to them. Programs and environments that require young girls to serve adult men under the guise of religious or spiritual duty, where silence is demanded and obedience is enforced, must not be rebranded or reshaped. They must be permanently dismantled. The systemic concealment of abuse, particularly through coerced or arranged marriages involving minors, represents a grave violation of both moral and legal standards. These practices, no matter how long it's been happening or deeply rooted in our organization's culture, simply cannot continue. This is not tradition. This is a crime. To address these failures, we call for immediate and decisive action. First, all forms of child labor disguised as spiritual or organizational service to these so-called leaders must be stopped. No child should be placed in labor roles that benefit adult leaders, male or female, at the expense of their education, health, or child development. Second, the practice of forced or arranged marriages involving minors, especially those used to conceal abuse, must be ended and investigated where appropriate under child protection and trafficking laws. Third, institutions involving children must be required to maintain transparent policies, regular audits, and external oversight to ensure accountability. Lastly, any roles within youth programs must be designed to promote healthy development and learning of our children, not to serve the personal comfort or image of our leaders. We owe this reform to every girl who was silenced, to every child whose life began in secrecy, and to every future child who deserves a community grounded in safety, dignity, and truth. It is essential that we teach our children to respect adults, but that respect must never come at the cost of their personal safety or boundaries. Alongside lessons in politeness and obedience, children must also be taught that they have the right to say no to any adult who puts them in a situation that feels wrong, unsafe, or uncomfortable, no matter who that adult is. Empowering children with the knowledge that they can trust their instincts, speak up, and remove themselves from danger is a critical part of protecting them from harm. They should know how to firmly assert themselves, how to physically leave a situation if necessary, and how to seek help immediately from a trusted adult, authority figure, or even a stranger in public if they feel threatened. Respect and self-protection are not conflicting values. They are both necessary tools for a child's healthy development and their safety. Putting it plainly, while it's important for kids to be respectful to adults, they also need to know it's okay to say no if an adult is doing something that makes them feel uncomfortable. Children should understand that their safety comes first, always. They should be taught that they don't have to stay quiet or obey if someone is trying to hurt them or cross their boundaries. If they ever feel scared or unsure, they should know how to speak up, get away quickly, and ask for help from someone they trust or anybody who happens to be nearby. Respecting adults does not mean ignoring danger, and show them that it's okay to walk, kick, scream, bite, or even run away if something does not feel quite right. To help our little girls right now, we must take clear, compassionate, and immediate steps that go beyond silence, that go beyond observation. and beyond passive concern. We must truly see them for the child that they are. Not just the roles they're playing or the uniforms they wear, but the actual child behind the quiet obedience. We must look past the smile that may be hiding fatigue or fear or confusion. See the weight in their posture, the pressure in their eyes, and remember that no child should be expected to ever carry adult expectations. We, the adults, must question what we've been told in every situation, especially when it comes from respected organizations or religious settings. We're not supposed to simply believe everything that's told to us, but we should check, confirm, and verify information before leaving our children in the hands of other adults for extended periods of time. Just because something is familiar or presented as tradition does not make it safe. If a child is consistently placed in service to adults, especially in a way that limits education, freedom, or emotional development, we must ask ourselves if this is helping or harming them. We must speak up. If something doesn't feel right, we ought not ignore it. Ask questions. Make sure they know they can come and talk to us. Let them know that we believe them whenever they do talk to us. Even if it's difficult, we ought to make sure that they actually believe us whenever we tell them that they can come and talk to us, that we will believe them when and if they do. If they tell us something, we should immediately share our concerns with a trusted authority, mandated reporters, or child protection agencies. Speak gently but firmly whenever we're addressing the needs of any of our children. Protecting a child is always worth the discomfort of asking hard questions. And equally important, we must listen to the survivors, the women who were once those little girls and are now using their voices to share what they endured. They're not bitter. They're not disgruntled. They are, quite frankly, brave. Their stories hold truths, and by hearing them, we can better understand what needs to be changed, because we now finally know what has been going on right under our noses. And even more upsetting is the fact these things were being done in the name of religion. Finally, we must protect childhood itself. Let little girls and little boys play. Let them rest, let them dream, and let them discover who they are without fear. Give them the freedom, the space, and the liberty to say no whenever need be. Give them the space and the freedom and the liberty to ask questions so that they will be able to grow at their own pace. Don't force them to be symbols. Don't force them to be servants. And more importantly, do not force them to be a silent follower. Let them be children, fully, freely, and joyfully. This is where healing begins, and this is where our responsibility lies. We need to put a stop to this. I'll see you in the next video.